Yusuf, Malik, and Karim Arif weren't just brothers. They were the silent rulers of London's underworld, a family whose wealth, power, and ruthless ambition turned the city's shadows into their kingdom, and whose fall would shock the streets that once feared them. In the late 1980s, London's East End was a place of change, hope, and hidden struggles. Immigrant families worked tirelessly to build better lives, while the streets buzzed with opportunity and danger in equal measure. Among those families were the Arifs, Yusuf, Malik, and Karim, three brothers raised in a cramped flat above their father's small grocery shop on a narrow street in Stepney. Their father was a quiet man who believed in hard work and faith. He sold fruits, vegetables, and bread to neighbors who trusted him. But his sons grew up watching something else entirely: the power of money and fear that ruled the city after dark. The Arif brothers were smart, observant, and hungry for more than the honest life their father struggled to maintain. London's underbelly fascinated them, the black market traders, the men in expensive suits who never seemed to work, the dealers who drove new cars through broken streets. They saw that respect wasn't earned through kindness, but through control. The oldest brother, Yusuf, was calm and calculating. He understood people, studied their weaknesses, and learned how to use them. Malik, the middle brother, was ambitious and ruthless, quick to take risks if it meant more power. Karim, the youngest, was impulsive and charming, the one who could convince anyone to trust him before turning the situation to his advantage. Their first step into the world of crime came quietly. It began with small packages, cigarettes, watches, and fake designer goods smuggled into London from Turkey. The brothers made quick money, splitting profits behind their father's back. Soon they found connections in the markets of Brick Lane and Whitechapel, where illegal goods changed hands faster than the police could react. Their success drew attention. Some saw them as clever businessmen, others as troublemakers. But to the Arifs, it was just the beginning of something bigger. As months turned into years, their operation grew. They began bribing dock workers to look the other way when shipments arrived. Small-time criminals started working under them, collecting payments and distributing goods across South London. What had started as petty smuggling now had structure, discipline, and ambition. The brothers were building something quietly, an organization that operated in shadows but reached into nearly every corner of the city, and yet no one outside their circle truly knew their names. By the early 1990s, whispers began to circulate about a mysterious group that could move cash, drugs, or weapons, without leaving a trace. Their prices were high, but their results were guaranteed. This invisible reputation made them both admired and feared. Even local gangs avoided crossing them, unsure who really stood behind the growing power on their streets. The Arifs never used violence unless it was necessary. Their greatest weapon was loyalty. Loyalty bought, threatened, and demanded. They paid well, helped struggling families, and made sure people stayed silent. Their business thrived in plain sight, hidden under legitimate fronts like car dealerships and import companies. No one could have guessed that three brothers from a small grocery store were quietly creating the foundation for what would become one of London's most dangerous criminal dynasties. Their empire was born not from chaos, but from calculation, a silent rise built on greed, secrecy, and the promise of power that would soon consume them all. The Arif brothers' growing influence began to take root in the bustling streets of South London. Areas like Peckham, Bermondsey, and Camberwell were alive with trade, nightlife, and opportunity. The perfect hunting ground for men who thrived in the shadows. At first, the Arifs appeared to be nothing more than well-dressed businessmen with a touch of mystery. They invested in nightclubs, taxi companies, and warehouses, blending in among the city's entrepreneurs. But behind the polished image was a network of intimidation and control that spread quietly, like smoke through narrow alleyways. Their method was simple, but effective. Club owners who wanted security would approach them for help, and once the Arifs were involved, there was no turning back. Bouncers became their eyes and ears, dealers worked only with their permission, and every pound made in their territory was taxed under their silent rule. The brothers offered protection, but it was a protection that no one dared refuse. Those who paid on time found their businesses running smoothly. Those who resisted often discovered smashed windows, stolen cars, or anonymous threats slipped under their doors. It was a system built on fear and reliability. No one complained to the police because everyone knew that silence was safer. Their operation grew more sophisticated each year. Malik handled logistics, ensuring every club and business paid what they owed. Karim maintained public relationships, charming local owners and investors with his easy confidence. Yusuf stayed in the background, overseeing everything with cold precision. Together they created a criminal structure that looked more like a corporation than a street gang. Every person under them had a job, a set of rules, and a price. Police officers occasionally heard rumors about a Turkish group running parts of South London, but without evidence, there was little they could do. The Arifs were careful. They never spoke on phones, never signed documents, and never appeared in the same place twice during business meetings. They paid their men in cash and kept their circle small. When the police raided a warehouse or questioned a club owner, no one ever mentioned their name. Fear kept their world airtight. By the late 1990s, the brothers had more money than they could count. They moved into luxury homes, bought expensive cars, and began mixing with legitimate businessmen. Through property deals and import-export companies, they turned illegal profits into clean investments. Yet beneath the surface, the streets still belonged to them. They were the silent rulers of South London, the hidden force that made things happen, or made them Despite their wealth, the brothers never lost touch with the streets that had built them. They funded small community events, helped families in need, and donated to local mosques. To outsiders, they appeared generous, even noble, but this generosity had a purpose: to keep loyalty strong and suspicion weak. People trusted them because they seemed untouchable, almost mythic. The Arif name became a quiet legend. One spoken carefully in pubs and backrooms, always with a hint of fear. No one could prove who they were or how they operated, yet everyone knew the truth. South London was theirs, and anyone who forgot that soon paid the price. As the years passed, the Arif brothers' empire grew wider and more dangerous, but so did the tension between them. What had begun as a shared dream of power slowly turned into a competition for dominance. Money had changed everything. The brothers who once stood together now watched one another with suspicion, each guarding secrets and profits that were no longer shared as openly as before. Their network spanned drugs, extortion, smuggling, and property deals. But beneath the success was a growing hunger for control. The bond that had made them unstoppable was beginning to crack. Yusuf, the eldest, saw himself as the head of the family, calm, strategic, and ruthless when needed. He valued loyalty above all else, and treated the organization like a military operation. But Malik, the middle brother, believed he was the true engine behind their success. He was ambitious and impatient, always chasing larger deals, always pushing the limits. Karim, the youngest, cared less about structure and more about thrill. His charm made him popular among both criminals and socialites. But his reckless lifestyle started drawing attention the family didn't want. He spent money freely, surrounded himself with dangerous people, and began to believe he was untouchable. The division between them deepened when Karim entered the drug trade on a larger scale. He made contacts with slayer from Eastern Europe and the Middle East, moving heroin through secret routes that bypassed London's traditional criminal networks. The profits were enormous, but so were the risks. When shipments were seized and men arrested, Yusuf blamed Karim for attracting unnecessary attention. Malik tried to mediate, but his own greed made him unreliable. He had started moving the family's money into property across London, laundering millions through construction projects and luxury developments. Every brother was building his own empire, using the family name as protection, while keeping his true earnings hidden from the other. Their once tight network began to show signs of weakness. Trusted lieutenants picked sides, some swearing, loyalty, Yusuf, others drawn to Karim's lavish lifestyle. Rumors circulated that the brothers were arguing behind closed doors. In the underworld, such rumors were dangerous. Rivals began testing boundaries, attacking small corners of their operations to see how the brothers would react. Each retaliated separately, sending different messages to different enemies, creating confusion and instability within their own ranks. Yusuf tried to restore order through fear. He reminded everyone who had built the empire and who had the power to destroy it. But the damage had already begun. Karim's connections brought in more drugs, more money, and more enemies. Malik's investments tied the family to corrupt officials and businessmen, blurring the line between the legal and illegal world. What once ran smoothly now depended on fragile alliances and bribes. Inside the family, trust was fading fast. Meetings turned cold, phone calls short, and silence replaced brotherhood. Each of them feared betrayal, not from outsiders, but from within. Yet none could walk away. They had built something too vast, too profitable, and too dangerous to abandon. What they didn't know was that this hunger for power would soon lead them to a breaking point, one that no amount of money could repair. By the mid-2000s, the Arif brothers had become legends of London's criminal landscape. Though few outside their circle even knew their faces, they no longer worked from the streets they once ruled. Their business had evolved into a complex web that reached every corner of the city. They were no longer just gangsters. They were businessmen in tailored suits, controlling operations through coded messages, front companies, and layers of intermediaries. What made them so powerful was not the brutality they once relied on, but the precision with which they ran their empire. Every illegal act was disguised as legitimate business. Every transaction hidden behind clean paperwork and forged documents. Their network extended across Europe, from drug routes in Amsterdam to money laundering operations in Cyprus. The brothers understood that power came not only from fear, but from influence. They bought silence with cash and loyalty with opportunity. Police officers were paid to look the other way. Lawyers ensured charges disappeared, and accountants turned dirty money into legal profits through property and trade. Their empire included construction companies, car import businesses, and luxury nightclubs, all functioning as facades for their growing criminal wealth. But beneath the surface, fear remained their true foundation. The brothers ruled their network through intimidation, so subtle it rarely needed to be spoken. A missed payment or careless mistake didn't always end in violence, but the possibility of it was enough to keep everyone obedient. People vanished without explanation, warehouses were burned to the ground, and competitors who tried to rise against them found their operations dismantled overnight. To the outside world, these incidents seemed like bad luck or rival disputes, but in the underworld, everyone knew the truth. Nothing happened in London without the Arifs knowing. The family's control stretched into the city's nightlife and real estate markets. Clubs, bars, and even private security firms answered to them. Their connections reached local councils, building inspectors, and even small-time politicians. Every favor had a price, and every debt was collected in full. They had turned corruption into an art form. To ordinary Londoners, they were invisible. To those who crossed paths with them, they were ghosts who ruled from the shadows. While Yusuf and Malik maintained discipline, Karim continued to test the limits. His deals with foreign traffickers brought in higher profits, but also unwanted scrutiny. International agencies began tracing suspicious shipments linked to London ports, unaware that they were touching the edges of the Arif empire. Yusuf warned his brothers to slow down, but greed had taken over. The business was too big to stop, and the flow of money was intoxicating. They believed they had built something unstoppable, too sophisticated for the police, too feared for betrayal. Yet, cracks were beginning to appear, faint but dangerous. Some of their most trusted men were growing restless, tired of living under constant pressure and fear. A few started talking quietly to outsiders, passing hints for protection or money. The Arifs didn't know it yet, but their empire had reached its peak. The bigger it grew, the more fragile it became. Every secret they'd buried was one discovery away from exposure. In a world built on silence, even a single whisper could bring everything crashing down. The downfall of the Arif family began not with a rival or a police operation, but with betrayal from within. For years they had built their empire on silence, trust, and fear, but loyalty in the criminal world was only ever rented, never owned. Among their most trusted men was a quiet enforcer named Eddie Khan, known in the underworld as Eddie the Ghost. He had worked for the Arifs since the early days, handling collections, transporting shipments and dealing with problems that required a steady hand. He had seen everything, the deals, the killings, the bribes, and for a long time, he had been one of their most loyal soldiers. But when the police finally caught him during a covert drug operation near the docks, loyalty quickly turned to survival. Faced with a long prison sentence and no chance of escape, Eddie agreed to cooperate. The authorities had been chasing the Arifs for over a decade, but they never had solid evidence. Eddie changed that. In exchange for protection and a reduced sentence, he gave investigators the first real insight into how the Arif empire worked. He described hidden warehouses, shell companies, offshore accounts, and the intricate system of payments that tied every part of their organization together. His information was the missing puzzle piece that law enforcement had been waiting for. Operation Dynasty was quietly born, a secret investigation designed to dismantle one of London's most powerful crime families from the inside out. When the brothers learned about Eddie's arrest, panic began to ripple through their ranks. At first, they thought he would stay silent. After all, he owed them his life. But when one of their police contacts hinted that Eddie was being kept in a secure location and questioned daily, Yusuf knew the truth. He didn't need proof. He could feel betrayal in his bones. Within days, orders were given. Eddie's location was discovered through bribes and intimidation. Before the police could move him, his body was found inside a burnt-out car on the outskirts of Croydon. It was a brutal warning, not just to traitors, but to anyone who dared to think about speaking out. The murder silenced potential informants, but it also drew the kind of attention the brothers had spent years avoiding. National agencies began to take an interest, connecting dots that local police had missed. Surveillance teams started watching their properties, tracing phone records, and following the money. Slowly, the walls began to close in. Inside the organization, paranoia took hold. Meetings became shorter, trust thinner. Some of their closest allies started disappearing, either silenced by the brothers or fleeing to avoid the inevitable. Malik tried to tighten control through bribes and threats, but the damage was already done. Every department of their empire, drugs, property, smuggling, had been touched by betrayal. The Arifs were losing grip of the very thing they'd built their power upon, fear. For the first time, people were no longer afraid of them. They were afraid to be near them. And that, more than any police raid or rival gang, was what would ultimately destroy the Arif crime family. After Eddie's death, the Arif empire was beginning to show cracks that even their wealth and influence could not conceal. Operation Dynasty, the undercover investigation sparked by Eddie's betrayal, had grown into a full-scale effort to map and dismantle every facet of the brothers' operations. For months, investigators worked silently, tracing the flow of money through shell companies, monitoring encrypted communications and planting surveillance in warehouses, offices, and even private homes. They were piecing together the intricate network the Arifs had spent decades constructing, connections that spanned the city, the country, and even across Europe. The first breakthrough came when analysts identified patterns in shipments moving through London docks. Previously, these deliveries had appeared innocuous, hidden among legitimate cargo, but by tracking paperwork, vehicle movements, and financial transactions, police uncovered a pipeline of heroin and counterfeit goods linked to Karim's operations. While the Arifs had always relied on secrecy, their rapid expansion had left small mistakes. Phone calls made from traceable devices, shipments registered under temporary fronts, that became the first threads investigators needed to pull. Surveillance footage soon revealed the brothers' patterns. Malik could be seen meeting financiers in upscale cafes, exchanging envelopes of cash and documents. Yusuf was less visible, moving quietly between offices, ensuring no missteps occurred. Karim remained flamboyant, attending luxury parties, meeting foreign contacts, and flaunting wealth that was now drawing more attention than ever. The contrast between the brothers' approaches was stark. Yusuf relied on control, Malik on manipulation, and Karim on exposure, each unknowingly contributing to the web that would eventually trap them. Undercover agents infiltrated their inner circle, posing as businessmen, couriers, and enforcers. Every meeting, every handshake, and every financial transaction was carefully recorded. Investigators began to map relationships and hierarchies, identifying who reported to whom, which properties were front companies, and which bank accounts were used to launder millions. Slowly, the invisible empire became tangible. What had seemed untouchable was now measurable, trackable, and vulnerable. The pressure began to affect the brothers themselves. Yusuf, once confident in his ability to anticipate every threat, grew increasingly paranoid. Meetings were held in secret, with only trusted lieutenants present, but even loyalty could not mask the growing tension. Malik became aggressive, issuing orders with more force than before, trying to hold the empire together while suspicious eyes watched his every move. Karim, meanwhile, ignored the warnings, continuing to expand his operations, believing that wealth and charm could protect him from scrutiny. A single misstep ultimately sealed their fate. Karim made a call to an associate already under surveillance, a seemingly minor conversation that tied him directly to Yusuf and Malik. In one phone exchange, investigators captured the connection that linked the three brothers to multiple criminal enterprises. The empire that had thrived in shadows for decades was now exposed under the unblinking eyes of law enforcement. What had once been a meticulously controlled organization was unraveling faster than they could react. Allies turned cautious, operations slowed, and the sense of invincibility that had defined the Arif's rise began to crumble. The walls that the brothers had built around themselves, designed to shield them from discovery and betrayal, were now closing in. The empire they thought indestructible was proving fragile, and the moment of reckoning, the downfall they had spent a lifetime avoiding, was closer than ever. By 2012, the Arif brothers' empire was on the brink of collapse, and law enforcement had prepared a decisive strike. Coordinated raids swept across London at dawn, targeting luxury homes, warehouses, nightclubs, and offices connected to the family. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. Hundreds of officers moved silently through the city, executing warrants that had been meticulously planned over months. For the first time in decades, the Arifs were no longer untouchable. Their carefully constructed network of fear and secrecy had been mapped and infiltrated, leaving them exposed. Malik was the first to be apprehended. Police stormed his mansion in South London, discovering large sums of cash, stacks of firearms, and documents linking him to shell companies and property deals used to launder money. His attempts to bribe the officers or intimidate them were futile. Every resource he had relied upon had been stripped away. Malik's arrest sent shockwaves through the organization. Associates who had long benefited from his protection began fleeing or disappearing, realizing that the empire was no longer capable of shielding them. Karim's capture was more complicated. He had fled to northern Cyprus, using a false passport and false identities. For months, international law enforcement agencies coordinated with London police, tracking his movements and communications. Eventually, a tip-off led to his arrest at an airport during a routine check. He was extradited to the UK, where he faced multiple charges, from drug trafficking and money laundering to violent crimes. Karim's flamboyant lifestyle had finally caught up with him. Every flashy party, every high-profile deal had left digital traces that investigators could follow. Yusuf proved the most elusive. Unlike his brothers, he had relied on invisibility, rarely making public appearances and avoiding unnecessary attention. For weeks he vanished, moving between rented flats and trusted safe houses. But even the calm, calculating Yusuf could not outrun modern surveillance and investigative techniques. Police eventually tracked him to a modest flat in North London. Surrounded by evidence of his operations, he was taken into custody without incident. His capture marked the symbolic and practical end of the Arif dynasty. The trial that followed was a spectacle. Courts filled with media, former associates, and law enforcement officials eager to witness the downfall of one of London's most secretive and feared crime families. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, intercepted communications, and testimonies from former lieutenants left no doubt about the brothers' criminal enterprise. The court revealed a decades-long history of corruption, intimidation, and violence that had allowed the Arifs to operate above the law for years. Sentences were harsh and symbolic. Yusuf, Malik, and Karim each received multiple life terms, ensuring they would never rebuild their empire. The families of victims, as well as rival gangs who had long feared retaliation, witnessed justice at last. The streets that had been controlled by silent threats and hidden power slowly began to reclaim themselves. Despite the arrests, the reach of the Arif name lingered. Former associates tried to fill the vacuum, creating smaller factions, but none could replicate the scale or the fear the brothers had commanded. London had seen the rise and fall of an empire, a dynasty built on secrecy, money, and intimidation, now dismantled by the very forces it had once outsmarted. The streets remembered, the records endured, and the story of the Arif brothers became a cautionary tale of power, greed, and the inevitable consequences of betrayal. Even after the arrests and life sentences, the shadow of the Arif family lingered over London's underworld. Their empire had been dismantled, but the structures, contacts, and wealth they had accumulated did not disappear overnight. Former associates moved cautiously, some attempting to reclaim territories once tightly controlled by the brothers, others quietly relocating operations abroad. In certain circles, the Arif name remained a symbol of fear, respect, and ruthless efficiency, a reminder that the dynasty they had built was not easily forgotten. The brothers' foresight became evident in the months following their imprisonment. Investigators discovered hidden accounts, secret properties, offshore investments that had been cleverly concealed for years. Money continued to flow through these channels, often reaching trusted lieutenants or distant relatives, who had been carefully chosen to maintain the family's influence. Even behind bars, the Arifs had created a network that could not be fully severed. Their foresight blurred the lines between criminal activity and legitimate business, leaving authorities struggling to untangle decades of meticulously layered operation. In the neighborhoods where the Arifs once ruled openly, life began to shift, but the change was fragile. Rival gangs, emboldened by the absence of the brothers, tried to stake claims, but few had the organizational skill or reach to truly dominate. Some former Arif lieutenants remained loyal to the family's methods, quietly maintaining control and sending subtle messages that the dynasty's influence had not completely vanished. Street corners, nightclubs, and warehouses were still monitored, still influenced, albeit indirectly. The legacy of control, intimidation, and secrecy proved difficult to eradicate. Beyond the criminal landscape, the Arif's story became a public fascination. Journalists, true crime writers, and documentary filmmakers chronicled the rise and fall of a family who had turned fear into power and money into influence. Their story highlighted the intersection of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal in ways that seemed almost cinematic. It served as a cautionary tale, not just for criminals, but for anyone who underestimated the consequences of greed and the far-reaching impact of hidden networks. Yet the most striking aspect of their legacy was psychological. Former associates, rivals, and even ordinary citizens carried the memory of the Arif's reign. Whispers persisted in bars, markets, and social circles about the family that had once operated in the shadows, the brothers who could make someone disappear with a single decision. These stories kept the legend alive, ensuring that, even imprisoned, the Arifs remained larger than life. Some experts argue that the dynasty never truly ended. The systems they built, the people they influenced, and the wealth they secured allowed a new generation of criminal figures to operate under the same principles. In many ways, London's underworld had been permanently altered. The Arifs had set a template for control, secrecy, and survival that others would inevitably study and attempt to replicate. Ultimately, the story of the Arif family is a study in extremes, the heights of power, the depth of betrayal, and the resilience of influence. Though the brothers are confined behind bars, their shadow continues to loom over the city. Their empire, though legally broken, lives on in whispers, warnings, and the careful movements of those who remember what it meant to rise under the dynasty's rule. London had seen the birth of a criminal empire, witnessed its terrifying dominance, and endured its dismantling, but one truth remains clear: the Arif name, with all its darkness and ambition, is a legacy that will not be forgotten.